All right, so in this lecture, we're going to tackle learning objectives and more specifically take a look at Bloom's taxonomy and how we can utilize that to develop well thought out and observable learning objectives. So the goal of effective learning should be to develop specific skills, knowledge, or behaviors that translate into action. A more effective type of learning objective is a performance objective. This places the focus of the learning on what learners will be able to do with the learning. It makes learning more action-oriented and meaningful. While this may not sound like a big issue, it actually can change the instructional design and delivery of training and education significantly. Benjamin Bloom was a researcher in the field of learning, and he explored how to make learning objectives have more impact. Researchers today have built upon Bloom's first publication titled Taxonomy of Educational Objectives, the Classification of Educational Goals, which includes his process for transforming learning objectives into performance objectives. Bloom said that learning objectives should employ action-oriented verbs instead of non-action verbs, like understand. This guide this guides the program designer to develop the program in a manner that leads to applicable outcomes. As you design a learning objective, use one of these action verbs to complete the following sentence. After completing this program, the learner will be able to blank. Good performance objectives give the designer, the facilitator, and the learner the best possible chance of developing skills, knowledge, or behavior that will drive results in the workplace. In teacher-centered learning, which is kind of the more traditional or conventional approach, the teacher functions in the familiar role of classroom lecturer, presenting information to the students who are expected to passively receive the knowledge that's being presented. On the flip side of that, in student-centered learning, the teacher is still the classroom authority figure, but functions as more of a coach or facilitator as students embrace a more active and collective role in their learning. So here is a learner-oriented kind of approach. So to read at least 250 words per minute with no less than 80% comprehension, to write a paragraph on a single topic, more teacher-oriented approach to show students the proper eye movements for scanning material, to write a paragraph on a single topic. So we can kind of see that the difference in those first two bullets. Okay. Objective. So we have to have an objective statement. An objective statement defines the expected goals of an educational activity. Learning objectives can be used to structure the content of an educational activity. Objectives may include tasks such as list, discuss, or state. An outcome is a written statement that reflects what the learner will be able to do as a result of participating in the educational activity. The outcome addresses the educational needs, the knowledge, skills, and or practices that contribute to the professional practice gap in achieving the learner outcome result and narrowing or closing the gap. The learning outcome can assess the overall impact of multiple objectives. So take a little bit to look at the learning objective and compare it to the learning outcome. A clear learning objective states what the learner will be able to do upon completion of an activity, of an educational activity, in terms of behavioral change. A clear objective identifies the terminal behavior or desired outcome of the educational offering. So we need to be very clear. So to know the breeds of cattle, to list in writing the scientific names of beef cattle, To see the connection between feed rations and weight gain, to appreciate the environment. So we can kind of see where some of these could be ambiguous and where some of these could be clear. So to know the breed of cattle is ambiguous, but to list to list the scientific names of beef cattle is more clear. To see the connection between feed rations and weight gain is clear. To appreciate the environment is more ambiguous. Well-developed learning outcomes are participant oriented, so student-centered. They're also observable and measurable. So the participant will be able to perform. Let's take. You want your learning objectives to be observable. Well-developed learning outcomes are participant-oriented. They're also observable and measurable. As an example, the participant will be able to perform serum management procedures. That one is going to be something that is observable. We want to avoid difficult to observe or measure. Here's an example. Participants will understand the importance of a cochlear implant. Not necessarily something that is directly measurable or observable. This next part is action statements. You're kind of having to think about what is the student expected to know. It needs to be observable, and they need to use action verbs. The condition statement, the learning objective should include the specific condition under which the learner should demonstrate a particular skill, if there are any. The condition can specify resource materials needed and help control the complexity of the task. An example of a learning objective with a condition is, given a list of 10 elements, be able to identify those elements that are metal. So the condition is you're provided 10 elements, and then the action segment of that is you have to identify those elements that are metal. Criteria statement, standard by which success is measured. So you are saying in this previous one that talked about the list of 10 elements and identifying which ones are metal. So we have the standard by which success is measured. You could add in there, be able to use the periodic table and identify at least 5 metals. That's providing a standard which success is measured. Steps in writing objectives, describe the subject matter content, specify general goals, then break down goals into observable objectives, and then check objectives for clarity and appropriateness. So you're going to start with a very broad goal, and then you're going to hone in on one specific thing that is observable and measurable and use that to develop your objective. And then at the end, you need to make sure that it is clear and it is appropriate for your class. So we're going to take a look at learning domains. So the first one is Bloom's classification system. Affective and cognitive learning are 2 of the 3 domains of educational activity. The third is psychomotor learning, and these were identified by Benjamin Bloom in his paper Taxonomy of Educational Objectives, which was published in 1956. So it's been around for quite some time. The affective domain refers to emotional and attitudinal engagement with the subject matter, while the cognitive domain refers to knowledge and intellectual skills related to the material. These domains have had a long history of use within traditional classroom instruction and have also been applied to the online classroom. The online classroom typically refers to a virtual learning environment in which students and instructors are separated by distance and or time, but they still engage in the same things of planning instruction like a traditional classroom does. So the 3, once again, affective, cognitive, and psychomotor. typically what you're going to see in your traditional class will be cognitive, and then further learning would be affective, and psychomotor is something that we'll take a look at here in just a little bit. So we also have another model that we can look at. So you've already looked at Bloom's taxonomy on WT class. So here's Bloom's taxonomy. We have knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. So once again, this is kind of a pyramid moving forward in kind of the difficulty. And some of these can actually be condensed down into the Newcomb-Treff's model. And so that one encompasses 4 areas: remembering, processing, creating, and evaluating. And those definitely are split into 2 levels of thinking: lower order thinking skills and higher order thinking skills. So when we ask you to remember something or memorize a date, that's a lower order thinking skill. But when we ask you to create something or critically think and evaluate something, those encompass higher order thinking skills. So let's dive deeper into the cognitive domain. Deal with mental or intellectual thinking skills and abilities. So we can see the knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation one more time. Here are some objectives in the cognitive domain. So take some time to pause and read some of these. I think when you think about conditions and setting standards and observable and measurable action verbs, you're going to find all of these here. So take some time to identify the condition statement. Think about the how we're measuring or the minimum for success if we're setting a standard, and identify the action verbs that are observable in here. So let's move over to the affective domain. Deals with attitudes, values, and emotions. It is interrelated to the cognitive domain, but we're thinking about receiving information, responding to information, putting values on certain things, also dealing with organization and characterization. So once again, here are some objectives in the affective domain. So take some time to read over these. So some of the things you're going to notice is the standard of success looks a little different. We don't necessarily measure it the same way. We're not going to slap on have a 90% to be successful onto these. We're thinking a little bit differently. We're talking about constructing arguments. We're talking about developing a speech. We are working on writing an essay. So the measurable and the observable aspect of this in the affective domain definitely looks different. Now moving over to the psychomotor domain, this includes physical movement, coordination, and the use of motor skills. Development of these skills require practice and is measured in terms of speed, precision, distance, procedure, or techniques in execution. Thus, psychomotor skills range from manual tasks such as digging a ditch or washing a car to more complex tasks such as operating a complex piece of machinery or dancing. The 7 major categories are listed from simplest behavior to the most complex. Okay, so that was the last slide for objectives. So take some time to pause on this one and read through objectives in the psychomotor segment. I want you to identify the condition statements. I also want you to look at the measurable and observable verbs. If you have any questions, always reach out to me. Thanks.